The story begins with a man named Gulliver, who worked at a newspaper company in New York. As soon as he wakes up in the morning, he freshens up and heads towards his company. There, he meets a new employee named Dan. Gulliver explains the work to Dan. Dan was very confident and sharp, so he started meeting everyone without hesitation. He even meets the owner of the company and introduces himself. Then they both meet a journalist named Darcy Silverman. Gulliver had had a crush on her for many years, but had never confessed his feelings to her. Due to his sharpness and confidence, Dan is made the head of the mail department on his first day at work. This makes Gulliver very upset. As he is going home feeling sad at night, he sees Darcy still working in the office. Gulliver gathers his courage and decides to confess to Darcy. However, when he sees her, he becomes very nervous, and instead of confessing, he picks up an application form and starts to leave. At that moment, Darcy asks him if he wants to apply for a travel assignment. Gulliver agrees and learns that he has to submit a travel blog the next day. Gulliver had never done this kind of work before, so he copies other people's blogs from the internet to create an assignment and submits it to Darcy the next day. Darcy is quite impressed after reading the blog. She gives Gulliver another assignment about ships that had disappeared in Bermuda. For this work, Gulliver needed to go to Bermuda. To impress Darcy, Gulliver agrees and sets off for Bermuda the very next day. As soon as he arrives in Bermuda, a man takes Gulliver in his car and gives him a boat arranged by Darcy. The man explains the details about the boat to Gulliver, after which Gulliver sets off alone towards the Bermuda Triangle. During the journey, he reads a novel titled How to Build a Robot and falls asleep after drinking a lot of Coke. When he wakes up, he sees a huge wave in the ocean caused by an approaching storm. He quickly puts on his life jacket. However, when Gulliver looks back, he sees a massive sea tornado. The boat gets caught in the tornado. A few hours later, when Gulliver regains consciousness, he feels something crawling on his chest. When he looks, he sees a group of very tiny people on his chest. One of them introduces himself as Edward, the commander of the local army. Gulliver gets scared and breaks all the ropes that had tied him up, then stands up. Believing he is dreaming, he closes his eyes. Meanwhile, on the commander's order, the tiny people attack him, causing him to fall to the ground and lose consciousness again. When Gulliver regains consciousness, he finds himself in the kingdom of Lilliput, where he meets King Theodore and his daughter Princess Mary. Gulliver asks the king if this is some sort of film shooting, then he shouts to call the cameraman. Edward accuses Gulliver of being a Blefuscian spy and requests the king to imprison him. Gulliver is then imprisoned in a cave where he meets a man named Horatio, who was also accused by Edward of courting Princess Mary. Together, they make fun of Edward, who then arrives and takes them both to plow a field. He attaches a machine to Gulliver to control him. Then they hear the sound of bells, indicating an attack by Blefuscia. Edward orders Gulliver to rush towards the palace because he wants to impress everyone by saving Princess Mary. However, Horatio requests Gulliver to save Princess Mary. Gulliver heads towards the princess and rescues her from being kidnapped by the Blefuscians. Meanwhile, the Blefuscians set the palace on fire, trapping King Theodore in the flames. To save the king, Gulliver pulls down his pants and extinguishes the fire by urinating on it. In the joy of saving Princess Mary and the king from the Blefuscians, Gulliver and Horatio are freed from captivity, and the king invites them to a banquet that night. Hearing this, Edward becomes very angry. At the banquet, the king asks Gulliver where he is from. Gulliver tells them he is from Manhattan. The people assume Gulliver is the president of Manhattan. Gulliver goes along with it and tells them he is known there as President Awesome. Everyone except Edward believes him. The next day, the people of Lilliput build a huge house for Gulliver so he can live comfortably. Gulliver also has them build a theater, where he shows the people a play about the sinking of the Titanic, claiming it to be a real event from his life. Edward questions how Gulliver survived after sinking. Gulliver replies that it was due to resuscitation. Later, Horatio requests Gulliver to help him impress Princess Mary. Gulliver agrees. They go to the palace, where Gulliver sings the song Kiss, and tells Horatio to act as if he is singing it. Horatio does so, and soon enough, the princess is impressed. However, suddenly, Edward calls out to Princess Mary. She quickly goes to her room and finds Edward there, trying to court her. To distract him, she starts talking about other topics. In the evening, Gulliver learns that the Imperial Army has found his boat. When he goes to check, he sees that the boat is in bad condition. He finds his phone, which is still working. When Gulliver checks his cell phone, he sees many messages from Darcy. After listening to the recordings, Gulliver realizes that Darcy has discovered he copied the blog from the internet and is furious. She tells him that she is coming to Bermuda to do the research herself. Hearing this, Gulliver becomes very worried and decides to stay in Lilliput forever. Edward doesn't like his decision and tells the king that he suspects Gulliver. The king dismisses his concerns and instead appoints Gulliver as commander. In anger, Edward disables Lilliput's defense system, resulting in another attack by the Blefuscian army. Gulliver, fulfilling his role as commander, once again saves Lilliput from the attack. The people of Lilliput are very pleased and start fulfilling Gulliver's every wish. One night, Edward enters Princess Mary's room without permission, making her very angry. She tells him that she doesn't like him. Enraged, Edward goes to Blefuscia to take revenge on Gulliver. He requests the Blefuscian king to build a robot using Gulliver's book, How to Build a Robot. The Blefuscian king agrees. A few days later, alarms start ringing in Lilliput. Gulliver prepares for the fight, but faces a robot operated by Edward. Despite Gulliver's efforts, Edward easily defeats him and forces him to tell everyone the truth. Gulliver complies. Afterward, Edward forcibly ties him to a plank and sends him off to an island called Where We Dare Not Go. When Gulliver reaches the island, a giant girl picks him up and takes him home. She dresses him in Barbie doll clothes and starts playing with him like a toy. Meanwhile, Darcy arrives in Lilliput. As soon as Edward sees Darcy, he recognizes her because Gulliver had already told them about her. Edward imprisons Darcy in a cave where she meets King Theodore and his queen. Seeing all this, Horatio decides to bring Gulliver back and reaches the giant girl's house. He informs Gulliver about everything and asks him to return to Lilliput with him, and Gulliver agrees. Gulliver takes the parachute from a dead pilot in the giant girl's room and flies back to Lilliput with it. He goes to Darcy, apologizes, and confesses his feelings to her. Darcy forgives him. Then, Gulliver challenges Edward to a duel for the sake of Lilliput. Edward declares that if Gulliver loses, he will destroy Lilliput. The fight begins, but this time, Gulliver is not alone. Horatio joins the battle to help him. Using a horse, Horatio reaches the robot and enters it. From inside, Horatio sabotages the robot. Seizing the opportunity, Gulliver beats Edward and defeats him. Princess Mary is very impressed by Horatio's bravery and kisses him. Edward tries once again to capture the princess, but this time she punches him, knocking him out. Darcy then kisses Gulliver for the first time. Gulliver mediates a peace agreement between the king of Lilliput and the king of Blefuscia, establishing peace between the two kingdoms. Gulliver and Darcy then set sail back to New York on a boat. A few weeks later, it is shown that Gulliver has become a travel writer and is in a good relationship with Darcy. As they both leave the office together, the movie ends